Hi, good morning, everyone. This is Nate Teske, and welcome to Sales Stories with Nate Teske. We've got a special guest this morning, a person that I worked with back in the mid 90s, right after graduating college at our very first sales job. And just by way of background, my history as it relates to sales, I spent 30 years, 3 decades in sales, primarily in the technology world and different sales of services as well as products, later SaaS solutions, and some support services. But from a podcast perspective, the focus today is going to be around some sales stories that one of my former colleagues, Tim Burkholder, is going to be sharing with us today. Also on with us is Rob Sullivan.
Yeah, welcome. Thanks, Nate. My background is that I approach sales from a lot of different angles. I started out in advertising account management, selling campaigns and doing things like that. Went on executive search, options trading, things like that. But the last, I'd say 16, 18 years, I've been doing sales training and coaching. And I've been very fortunate to lead workshops on literally every topic you can think of related to sales. And I've spoken in 14 different countries. And a big part of the fun for me in that is just literally being out in the field with people. In fact, in a couple of weeks, I'm going to be in Belgium working on a coaching assignment, which is going to be super fun. I love that stuff. So that's my background.
Right on. Thanks, Rob. So, Timmy, why don't you talk a little bit about your background and how we first started in sales and kind of cut our teeth, and then we'll have a little bit of the background from us. And actually, before you do that, I wanted to just highlight one thing. So when we moved last year, I want to get this in the frame. When we moved last year, my wife and I, we had an interior design person, and usually all of the mounts and such that I have of animals I've harvested over the years are in the basement. But in my office here, she said, "Hey, do you have one that's really special?" And I said, "Yeah." I said, "This one." I said, "It's the very first one I got." And the funny story about that, Rob, when I shot this deer with a bow and arrow, I couldn't find it right away. So I called Timmy at the time we were working together in the mid 90s. I said, "Hey, Timmy, I just shot this huge buck." I said, "You got to come over, man. You got to help me look for it." He's like, "Okay, I'll be there a little bit." So like 20 minutes later, he shows up and we're out looking. And the last drop of blood, it was dark. It was like 10 o'clock at night. Last drop of blood, I marked it and I said, "Hopefully I find this thing." Went home, I prayed about it. I said, "God, please let me find this big, beautiful deer." So anyway, I called Timmy the next morning, 7 o'clock. "I got it. I got it." So I had to highlight that just because Timmy is the only person that was experiencing that with me that day, because it was a school day, and I may or may not have played hooky that afternoon to kill an animal. So anyway, I had to point that out. But Tim, talk about your background and kind of how it leads into the discussions and the sales stories that you're going to talk about today.
Yeah, sure. Totally forgot about that story, Nate. That was a blast from the past. Yeah, so Nate beat me by about a little over a year into retirement. I spent 31 years in technology sales. I started with Nate right out of college at ADP. We worked together for a couple years. I had a small remote office outside of Chicago, actually Northwest Indiana. They gave to two 20-year-olds. I don't know why they did that, but they did that. We had an absolute blast, and ADP was just a great proving ground and training ground that really launched me into the rest of my career. So I spent everything within HR and financial software. I ended my career the last 8 years within the Workday ecosystem selling deployment services of Workday software. So these were strategic $1 million plus deals. That was really a blast to work on. You got to work with the biggest names in the country, and I was just very, very grateful to have that opportunity and learn from all of that.
Yeah, that's awesome, and especially because leveraging the ADP experience. That's one thing that I found, because over the years I worked with people that worked at ADP, and I can say hands down, every one of them was just love the grind. And back when we started, as you said, we're 20 something kids. We just got our IDs. We're all fired up about being able to drink legally, and we would do our calls and such, and we'd go out. I forgot what day was it, Tuesday, Tim, that we had those meetings where we had to talk.
Yeah.
Roll call or whatever what you sold. And the thing that would suck was when you didn't sell anything that week, you had to say pass. And you felt like such a loser because everyone else like, "Oh, I did this deal with Sally. It was a great deal, blah, blah, blah. All right, Nate, what do you got?" Pass. And it's like, okay, we're not going to hear this loser today. But it was awesome because it put that pressure on everybody. And it was just fantastic training grounds because we used to have to be in on Mondays from 8 to, I think it was, we had to be there at like 7:30 physically in the office back in the old days. 8 to noon on Mondays, we do cold calls, and then Fridays 1 to 5 you had to be physically in the office to do the what were they called, Tim? Phone blasts or
Phone blitzes or
phone
yeah.
blitz? That's what it was. Phone blitz.
I'll piggyback on your roll call story because I won't say his name, but he ended up being like a VP and with I think SAP. I walked in a roll call one day and he said, "Hey Tim, I just signed an expense report for you. Am I going to be signing a sales order for you?" And that's one of the weeks I had to say pass.
Yeah, it was painful. It was painful, Rob. But you know what? I'll tell you, it taught, at least for me, it taught me the plan your work, work your plan. And in all seriousness, I mean, at the time it absolutely sucked because it was a lot of pressure and it was very transactional, smaller deals, like a few $1,000s or whatever a month in services for the payroll. But what I will say is when I went to other companies, if people didn't come from that ADP kind of gene pool, they just did not they didn't work as hard. It's the most blunt way to say it, right? And
Yeah,
it's, sales is very much you get out of it what you put into it type thing. But that training ground was just absolutely priceless
yeah,
for my.
agreed.
And that level of competition is healthy the way they did it. I've seen some companies do it where the competition doesn't strike me as healthy at all. But that idea, what I heard clearly in your voice is that the pressure was on yourself when you had to say pass.
Yep, absolutely,
Yep.
absolutely. And the other thing I'll say too uh, is probably 15, maybe 20 years ago now. I was at a trade show in New Jersey, and the job I was at the time, my territory was kind of the northeast part of the U.S. in the very early days of the company. And I go to this trade show, and we knew who was going to be attending. You had a list of the attendees. And ADP, coincidentally, is one of my prospects. So I see the CIO walk by our booth, and I'm like, "Hey, Mike." His name was Mike Capone, and started chatting with him. And I said, "Hey, I started my sales career at ADP back in the mid '90s." And he kind of started laughing. He said, "Nate," he goes, "ADP was the training ground for the entire software sales industry," which is true. I mean, it just
Get it?
a lot of those people that went from that space, because it was HR payroll services we were selling, and that translated into a lot of the ERPs, like the SAPs, the Oracles, and such, and the Workdays, as Tim said. So it really was it was funny to hear him say that because I've heard others people say that, but from the CIO, it was pretty telling. So I thought that was kind of interesting when I had that interaction with him.
So I'm curious about your best sales story, Tim. Kick us off with that one.
Yeah, so for sure. And so this goes back about 4 or 5 years ago. I was working with a company called Cross Country. It's now CrossView. It was in the Workday ecosystem. And Workday's a little bit unique. So Workday Direct themselves will go out and sell the software. And in some cases, they will also do the deployment. But in most of the cases, they work with what they call their partner ecosystem to bring into deals and to actually handle the deployment of the software. So this particular deal was Acrisure. Ended up being the largest deal in our small company's history. It was a $7 million deal. And I think the next closest was like 2 million. So it like completely blew it out of the water. So I had actually worked with this Workday AE very little. I mean, I had called him. I had just joined the company maybe 6 months in, and I had called him, had maybe 1 or 2 phone calls with him. And about 2 weeks later, I get a phone call from him and said, "Hey, I got this RFP. It's a blind RFP. Nobody wants to respond to blind RFPs, right? Because you're usually just column fodder at that point." So I said, "Yeah, we'll work with you on it." He brought us into the deal. Interestingly enough, the hardest part of the deal was selling internally to nobody in my company wanted to respond to the RFP. They were like, "This is a blind RFP, 1. 2, this is going to be a massive deal. We've never done this before. 3, our competition is going to be the big players in the space like KPMG, Deloitte, Workday themselves. Like, we don't think we have a shot at winning this deal." So I had every deal we went into, I had a partner. Like he was more on the operational and support side. Like he actually could deliver services, but he was kind of like a director level person. I worked every deal with him. So my first step was to convince him, "Hey, let's respond. Let's just knock down hurdles. Let's do the stage gates. Let's just keep progressing and see how far we get." I got him on board with that approach, so he was able to get the executives on board with that approach. We responded to the RFP, and we actually were down selected in the RFP. Now, what's even funnier, because the way the Workday ecosystem works for RFPs, Workday responds to the RFP. So a huge hurdle we had is the procurement person at this deal. She was very good at her job, which means me as a salesperson, I didn't like her very much because she was extremely good at her job. She was like, Tim, you guys as the deployment partner have to respond to the full RFP. This RFP was not just for deployment services, it was for software as well. So they were looking at Workday, they were looking at Oracle, they were looking at Ceridian, they were looking at multiple software partners. We can't respond to the software RFP. So we had to actually work with Workday's legal team to get special approval to actually respond to the whole RFP. So I did my part of the RFP, which was the deployment side. Workday did their part, and then they sent me a dump of, I'm not even joking, about 100 documents that I had to collate, combine with our RFP response to get it submitted. We were actually down selected. We then took a call with their team. We got further down selected after that phone call. So we became one of 3 that they were looking at. So it was Workday Services themselves, KPMG, which, by the way, the procurement person that I mentioned earlier, she came from KPMG. So my radar's up of, okay, she's got internal motivation to just select KPMG. We're just column fodder at this point. And then us. So those were the 3 players into the deal. I'll pause there. I know I've dumped a lot of info, so see if there's any questions.
That's great. I love it. So I do have a question. When you won that deal, and we're going to fast forward a little bit on this one.
Yep.
I firmly believe that when you debrief something like that you can learn as much about what happened in the deal during the debrief. And for example, a lot of times what you learn is how close you came to missing it. And it sounds like there were a few opportunities along the way. Talk about that.
There were more than a few opportunities for us to miss out. And actually, I don't want to sidestep your question, Rob, but I'll talk about what actually won us the deal.
Right.
And then I'll maybe mention a couple of things that could have hindered us. We won the deal because Workday was not, there were a couple components on the financials side of the house that they really needed. Workday did not have the expertise in-house to be able to address the questions. We did. He's actually one of my very good friends. He was another partner that I worked very closely with on this deal. I've worked with him at 3 different organizations. He had, I'm not even kidding, we probably had 30 product calls with their team where Adam, my guy, was doing the software selling. He's the one who did the use cases. He's the one that proved out that, yes, Workday can meet your needs, and that us as a deployment partner can deploy it successfully for you to be successful. Opportunities for us where we dropped the ball. I mean, we're just a small little company. Staffing was going to be a huge issue for us. We knew it. They actually required us to put together a staffing plan. We struggled with that because, quite honestly, we had to go out and hire people. We didn't even have them on board at the time because if we won that deal, we were going to have to staff this with 30 consultants. We didn't have 30 available consultants to go work this deal if we wanted. PMG did. I mean, there are hundreds, if not thousands, of consultants on staff there. So that was a big hurdle that we did have to overcome.
Wow, good for you. That's something to be proud of for sure.
Yeah.
So Tim, you mentioned that the internal sale was very, very hard, which I've been down that path more than once. Did you have an executive sponsor? You mentioned you had a guy that was, this guy doing all the product demos and such, but did you have someone in your company that was, for lack of a better term, giving you the air cover and being a buffer between senior management and the actual deal and engaging the customer?
Yeah. So Ravi was our guy. And so he was a director level. He was not an executive, but he had enough respect within the organization that once I got him on board, as Nate, as you said, he was that buffer. He went to our CEO and said, this is a deal that we can win. We can support it. We can do it. He was the one who actually helped me sell it to the executives. So at that point, our CEO was on probably at least 6 of the calls moving forward. He had to get her bought in, which he successfully did, and then she was fully bought in. Now, right at the end, and I don't even remember what the contract term was. There was one contract term. There always is, right? Last minute, they said, hey, if you don't do this, we're not signing. I literally was on the phone with her. It was like 8 o'clock at night on a Wednesday night. I'm like, Jill, like, I know you're competitive. I know you've got a big ego. We've got to put that to the side. We've got to get this deal done. And she finally agreed to do it. And it was something that was completely inconsequential. I mean, it was a contract term that was never going to be enacted, never going to be enforced. So we all have those, right?
Yep. Yep. Yeah. It's funny. We had a session last week with one of my former VPs. His name's Mark, and he said that internal sale was extremely difficult compared to the client sale, which is kind of interesting because the purpose of us as salespeople is to generate revenue, keep everybody paid, et cetera, grow the business. And sometimes when you have those big, huge opportunities, people get freaked out, right? Like, you start out like, hey, this is a long shot deal. Then you start going through the sales cycle, and all of a sudden it starts to get real. And they're like, oh shit, this might happen. What are we going to do if it happens, right? So you had to have 30 employees in your RFP response. So did you have to include like their resumes, for example, or what their background was, or how did you handle that?
Yeah, so we did have to, and we cobbled together as many as we possibly could. We did have to include their resumes. Fortunately, we had most of them already put together. We did have to kind of supplement and go get resumes put together for people that were like newer to the organization who hadn't completed one yet. So we did have to get that put together. I will fast forward even going down further. We had an event, and I think it was Workday Rising, which is their annual conference that they have. And we had an event where we rented out a bar, and the folks from this deal showed up, and the deal was done. We were already in doing work for them at the time. And my main point of contact at this organization, I sat down and I was just chatting with her, and come to find out, it was never even close. They were always going to go with us. She said it wasn't even close. You guys proved that you could do the deal. You're the one who sold Workday software. Workday themselves, they did a good job, but you guys are the one who really gave us the use case detail. We didn't really even consider the other competitors because they didn't do nearly as much as you guys did to prove your value in the deal.
That's amazing, especially when you consider who you were up against.
Yeah. It really was. And you're back channeling. Like, we had employees that used to work at KPMG who still knew executives over there. So like my boss at the time was back. He had a good friend who was a senior leader at KPMG. He was back channeling, hey, where do you guys sit in this deal? That happens all the time. Do it as much as you can. You gotta, there's a line you can't cross, but do that back channeling as much as you possibly can.
For the benefit of people who may be newer in their career, describe what you mean by back channeling.
Yeah, so this particular example, my boss was very, very good friends with a senior leader at KPMG. It's not like he could go say, hey, what is the proposal you have in front of them right now? But he could go in and say, hey, what's the feedback that you're getting from the deal? Like, what's your reps saying? Do they feel good about it? Are they in a good position? Do they feel like they don't want to compete in this deal anymore? Like, that's the back channeling I'm talking about. I would go to my rep at Workday because this company's likely to tell Workday, hey, Crossview's doing a great job. We love them. Or Crossview is dropping the ball here. So I was talking to my Workday rep multiple times a day. What are you hearing back from this company? What are they saying about us? Where can we do better? Where are we dropping the ball? That's the kind of back channeling I'm talking about.
At what point did you feel confident that you had it?
Rob, you're bringing back PTSD. I'm going to tell you another story. Not until they signed the contract. My story is they signed their contract on January 7th. I don't remember the exact year that it was, about 4 or 5 years ago. I was out shopping with my wife and kids for Christmas. So this was probably like December 20th, December 21st, something like that. And I got a text message from the Workday rep. Deal is dead. I'm not kidding you. My heart sunk. I'm like I put 8-9 months of effort, and I just get a text from the Workday rep that the deal is dead. Like, I had no context. He wasn't returning my call. I got in touch with him the next day. He had just got feedback from the company that Workday wouldn't capitulate to one of their software terms, and they're walking away. I kid you not, it was radio silence from then until December 31st. December 31st, we had a tradition in our family that we would make steak and crab legs. And I was literally taking crab legs out of the pot, I get a phone call on my cell phone. I always answer my cell phone. So my phone's ringing. It was the Workday rep. He was like, Tim, it's 7 o'clock on New Year's Eve. I'm pulling crab legs out of the pot. He's like, they just signed with us. Happy New Year. He hung up. And then that was, whatever it was, Thursday. And then on that following Monday, so like January 1st or 2nd or whatever it was, I get an email from the company. Yes, we're moving forward. Send us the final contracts. We'll be signing. They told us the exact date they would be signing, January 7th, and they signed on January 7th.
Wow.
You want to talk about a roller coaster, man. I was all over the road for 10 days.
Wow. That's wild. And it's weird. Where did the misdirection come from about their intention?
So on the Workday contract side, it was both Workday and the company playing hardball with each other. And Workday ended up winning. The company ended up relenting and not forcing whatever. And I don't remember what the term was that they were trying to get, but the company ended up relenting. Workday sent over the agreements. They signed them. And like I said, I got that call at 7 o'clock, and I'm not kidding. I was in a state of depression for 10 days. Like, $7 million deal. You basically had every resource at your company working on it, including your CEO. And I knew I was going to have to go back to my CEO and say the deal is dead. Not a fun conversation.
No, not at all. Wow. Well, congratulations for pulling it out at the last minute. And I love the fact it's really important, because the thing that stays with me on this is that they knew all along they were going with you, and you didn't know until January 7th that this is happening.
No, they kept their cards close to the vest. And it's not unusual, and Nate, I'm sure you experienced this as well. I mean, deals go into what they call that dead period, or that silent period. You get through a review, whether it's an RFP or you do a demo or whatever it is, you present your proposal, you come back with your BAFO, and then they go into a silent period. That silent period could be a week, it could be 2 months. You just don't know. I mean, they won't return calls, they won't return emails, and then you just got to wait it out. It sucks, but part of the job.
That's awesome, Timmy. And I have tons of questions based on what you just said. I'll kind of go through a few of them here. So when they called and said the deal was dead, that was you said the Workday rep called?
The Workday rep.
And because I want to understand. So when they said it was dead, and they're like, hey, it's not happening. And then 10 days later, he's like, we got the deal. Happy New Year. Like, that's a big mind screw, right? I would just like to understand, like, when he said the deal was dead, like, was it going to a different company, or how did that, in 10 days, what changed?
So in my heart of heart, like, I knew it was them playing hardball. I knew it was them.
When you say them, who is them?
The company. I'll say that Acrisure was the name of the organization. It was Acrisure playing hardball. I kind of felt in my heart of hearts like this is just a negotiating tactic. They're not going with somebody else. They're just playing hardball. But it really sucks to wait out that 10-day period of the hardball tactics.
Yeah,
so
happy holidays.
And was December 31st, was that your fiscal year end?
You're going to bring up a whole nother can of worms here. Oh my goodness. Yes, December 31st was our fiscal year end. Now, Workday is a very smart company. Many, many years ago, they changed their fiscal year end to January 1st.
Really?
Workday didn't really care whether they got it on December 31st or January. Now, they ended up getting it on December 31st. They signed that day, but Workday didn't care. The can of worms you're going to open up is in our organization, my boss and I believe the executives didn't want the deal signed in the fiscal year. They wanted it next year in January.
Really?
Yeah, and I'll tell you why, because our commission plan changed on January 1. I'm not even kidding. I lost about $40,000 in commissions because they signed on January 7th instead of December 31st.
Yeah. Wow. So when they said it was after the fact and you saw them, humanly at the bar, and they said it was always you that they were going to go with, did you ever get a sniff, kind of, you said in your heart of hearts or your gut feel? Because I'm a big believer, like when you're in sales, a lot of it is, I don't want to say seat of the pants, but it's like you get a feel like, hey, this ain't happening. I'm cutting ties or moving on, or this is going to happen and this is what we have to do to win it. Did you ever get that gut feel like during that 7-8 month sales cycle where, okay, we're going to get this? Or did you not, until they said on the 1st, we're moving ahead, and then they sign on January 7, which I have a question about January 7 also. But you ever get a gut feel at all during that engagement?
Yeah, so after we submitted the RFP, we had a first call with them where they kind of asked us a bunch of questions about our RFP response. We got through that call. And then we got to the point where like, okay, we need to set up multiple meetings with our product team. And multiple, I mean probably a dozen. And we got through, I'd say, the first 3 or 4, which were the major things that they needed to address, that they needed the product to be able to do. We did such a good job in those meetings. It was then that I felt like we're not losing this deal. Like we got through those first 3 or 4, and I'm like, we're not losing this deal. Like we're doing such a good, and it was clear that we were doing such a good job. Everybody on their team was completely on board with everything we were saying.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So you kind of, I shouldn't say knew, but you really had a strong belief after that 3rd or 4th one, and you got everything dialed in. We're going to get this.
Yeah, I would say, 3-4 months before they actually signed, I felt really good that we were getting this deal. I believe in karma. I'd never say that to my execs. I'd never write that down in Salesforce, but I felt like we were in a very strong position.
Yeah. That's super cool, man, because you said there was like 30 different meetings you had with them. I mean,
at least.
And was there ever anything like during those meetings you said, no, we don't do that, or no, we can't do this?
Yes.
And what did they say when you said that? What was their reaction, I guess you'd say?
They actually appreciated the feedback of, our recommendation was, this is not how you should be doing this. One, this is not best practice. This is not just something Workday can't handle. For the industry you're in, they were in healthcare, or I'm sorry, healthcare insurance. This is not best practice. Our company did have a specialty in insurance. So we had a lot of expertise in-house to be able to come to the table and say, this is the way you should be doing it. They knew that their processes were broken. They knew they had a Band-Aid on a lot of stuff. And they did flat out tell us, KPMG, they said our competition. They didn't say KPMG, but they said they're just telling us yes to everything. And you guys are not. You guys are telling us the real story. So they appreciated that.
I love that.